Hello and welcome to part 7 of making an antique gumball machine in Blender. And today is an exciting day. This is always one of my favorite parts of a project, when everything really starts to look good and come together, and that's when you make materials for your gumball machine, or for your project. But in this case it's a gumball machine. So let's go into our shading tab, and I'm going to start, let's see, I don't really use these windows when shading, so I'm just going to get rid of them. And I'm going to start with the red paint, because that's a nice simple area to start. We already made the material for our gumballs because I wanted the simulation to have different colors for our gumballs, but we'll work on the other materials. So we'll start with the red paint, and we're actually going to do the same thing that we did for our gumballs. So I'm going to actually select one of our gumballs, and I'm going to select this node group. I'm going to hit Control-C a couple times. Blender has a weird thing that when you copy nodes, sometimes if you hit Control-C it doesn't register it, so I always hit it a couple times. Maybe that's fixed in 2.8, but I'm not sure, so whatever. We'll go back to our base, paste those node groups, just plug this into our normals. Now if we look at the node wrangler, we can see that the size of the noise is too high. But if you look at, like, you know, this type of paint, you can see there's just like that little surface imperfections that look really nice when trying to create like a painted object, especially like when it's cast metal or whatever and it's painted. So let's make this way bigger, something like that. Go back to our material. Now we need to be way more shiny. And we can see that now our bump map is way too strong. So let's make this like 0.005. Okay, that's probably too weak now. 0.1. 0.1 is too much. 0.05. Still too much. 0.03. That looks better. I think it still needs to be much larger. Now I want my red color to go down a lot. I think that looks pretty good. I can put on perspective for this too, maybe. Yeah, I like that. I like the way that paint looks. It's like an uneven surface, but it's not. Maybe even a little bit smaller. 0.02. 0.01. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, you still see it in the reflections, but it's not like overwhelmingly bumpy looking. How's it look on the top? Maybe a little bit more. I'm indecisive. How about 1.5? Okay. Now let's play with our glass. Well, no, let's do some easier things first. Let's do our hardware. So I'm going to just paste that node group in again because it's just a super useful thing to have. Let's isolate this so we can see it up close better. Now for this is going to be metallic all the way because it is metallic. Should be pretty shiny. We can probably make our bump a little bit stronger. Scale, let's see. Something like that. Obviously not that strong. Okay, so we have that. Perfect. And now we just need to do this front plate. And I'm going to do a basic version of it for now, and then we'll do a better version later. But there is one thing we have to do in Photoshop. So I'm actually just going to use this as the texture, but we need to clean it up a bit. So I'm just going to actually cut this piece out, and we'll just hit crop. And in Blender, we're just going to actually use this as the texture, but we don't want this knob to be in the way. So I'm going to use my clone stamp brush with S, hit Alt to pick an area, and just clone this out. Now, some people in the Blender community really like to talk about like, oh, I use GIMP and I use open source for everything. That's not me. I love Blender, but I don't particularly care if something is open source or not. I've used Blender professionally, and I use Photoshop professionally, and it's my opinion as a professional that GIMP is at least a decade behind the features of Photoshop. You can use GIMP to get a lot of stuff to work, but for what we're doing right here, GIMP would be perfectly fine. I'm sure GIMP has some version of the clone stamp tool. I don't know what it is because I never use GIMP, but I'm just going to make this a little bit more even. But, you know, as a professional, the features that I use for other projects on a regular basis, GIMP can just not cut it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use Photoshop. There are other things that are better than GIMP that aren't Photoshop. I would rather use paint.net or something than GIMP, but I can't really recommend that because I don't use it ever because I use Photoshop. So that's just one thing I want to say. A lot of people, especially on like the internet, they'll be like, Blender plus GIMP. It's like, I'm only here for the Blender part. I love Blender to death. Blender's the greatest thing on earth, but you don't get any points from me if you're using GIMP. That means nothing to me. Okay, so let's save this as a new file. Come on, save. And this is in a folder called ref. We'll just go up and make a new folder called text. And we will call this faceplate. Now, technically, this is a weird dimension. It's not square. You should tend to use square textures, but if you're using a game engine, you would definitely want to use square textures, and you'd want them to be a power of 2. So for a game engine, you'd want this to be like 256 by 256. This is also an incredibly low resolution texture. You could probably find a better one online, but since we're just kind of speed modeling this, I say speed modeling like 3.5 hours into the project, I'm just going to work with that. So the first thing we're going to do is paste those nodes again because they're super useful. I'm going to switch this to factor because it should be. And before I forget, I'm going to go to like my other materials like the gumballs. Let me select a gumball and just make this factor. It won't change too much, but it's better just to use factor because it's grayscale instead of color. For this, we'll use factor instead. And I think those are all the materials we created so far. So for this one, let's just isolate it. And we have to UV unwrap this one. But before we do that, we will actually get the texture in there. So let's get our input. We'll say UV map. There's nothing there yet, but we will have one later. Let's put in a texture, image texture. We will open up the texture we just created. We will wire the UV map into vector. And I'm probably going to want to change the brightness and contrast of this, so we'll just go ahead and put one of those. Wire this into the color of our material. It obviously looks horrible, but we're going to go into UV editing. And now we want to get out of perspective mode. For this, we're going to need to apply the mirror modifier now because we want to UV unwrap without the mirrored UVs. So let's go into our image editor here, choose our faceplate, select here, and we're going to say unwrap reject from view. And then why am I in the, oh, I went to image editor, I want UV editor. There we go. So now we're just going to scale this until it roughly fits. It does not have to fit perfectly. It just has to roughly fit. So that looks pretty good already. And if we go into, I don't know, looked at there, we can see that the texture is already starting to appear on our 3D model. But what we want to do is just basically fit this. So This like circular area probably needs to be a little bit bigger and go up a little bit. There we go. And we can just take this and this and just, oops, scale on the x-axis until it's about there, just to where the edge of the gray ends on this. It seems like this part could go down a bit, so I keep using the Blender 2.8 shortcuts. It's really annoying. Let's bring this down a bit, and then also just bring this entire top, I did it again, down a bit. Because basically we just want to keep the gray area inside where the texture is. As you can see, we have some of the red on the bottom, and that's not going to work, so we'll just take that, grab it on Y, and bring it up until it's no longer in that gray area. So now the front part looks good, but we have a problem. Because we projected from straight on, the top vertices are being stretched all the way back, and same with the side vertices. We don't really have texture for that area, so we're just going to kind of wing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to side view, turn on X-ray, go into solid mode, and we're going to hide everything that's on the front. So all of this, once again, I used the wrong shortcut because Blender changes its shortcut keys. Hide all that, go into face mode, select these front ones where it doesn't look too stretched, and hide those as well, except for maybe these side ones. And probably if we go to the side in X-ray, we can get rid of the back ones as well. So hide those. And so now we have, we can also completely hide this whole thing. So now what we'll do is we'll select all this, we'll go to the top. Is this what I want to do? That doesn't matter too much. Okay, yeah. So we'll go to the top, and then we'll hit project from view. And now we'll just take this and just put it like, I don't know, right here or something. Somewhere where it doesn't like overlap with too much detail. Could probably even make it smaller. It's not going to look the greatest, but I also don't care. So, you know, it looks a little bit jarring, but it looks better than if it was stretched. I guess what we could do is scale this really big. So it looks like that. And I messed something up here because, let's see. Hopefully I can put this back to the way it was. What did I do there? Oh, I just forgot to, no? Technical difficulties. I guess I should have just hid these as well. All right, let's try that again. And if I, wasn't being lazy, I could create like another texture for this that isn't just borrowing from this, but okay, that looks good. Now it's not stretching that part, but now this top part is also not stretched. Now this is not the world's greatest texture job because really we're just, phoning it in with the texture that we already have, but I think for the purposes of this, that's fine. If you really wanted to, you could create a much better texture, and we could texture it then, but for this I think it's fine. So the last thing I want to do is fix up this piece. So I'm going to just go into face select that. What I'll do is on this bottom one, I'm going to select this edge and I'm going to put a seam there. Then I'm going to go into face mode, select this face loop and hit unwrap. And that way it unwraps as like a rectangle. And then we'll just move this somewhere where, I don't know. I don't really want that lumpy pattern. Let's just put it down here like the other thing. So now it has like a generic metal pattern and it looks fine. And we can see our noise shader coming into play. We have to play with that a little bit. So let's go back to shading now that we have our texture there. As you can see, our noise is way too big. So let's make it way too small, or just small enough. Well, that's like a magic eye almost. Like when you move it, you can see the depth, but when you let go, it's just solid. All right, let's put this back. I think this noise has to go even smaller. And then let's make it stronger. And this should also be metallic because this is a type of metal. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then let's just bring up the colors on this. One thing I want to do is in my UV editing, let's select everything. Let's look at this. I feel like that's a little bit curved. Yeah. So let's bring that up just a little bit so that this line is straighter. This should be all right. And then let's make this a little bit brighter. So bright, 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 contrast, 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 contrast. Maybe brighter still. I think my there we go. That's pretty much what I want it to look like. All right. Whoa, when did this guy get red? Oh, because its vertices aren't unwrapped, right. So this is using the same material as our thing here. And so let's fix that now. So what's happening here is in the UV editing, if we select it, it just has vertices down here on the red area. And we just don't want them to be there. We can just use some other area. And now we get that material. We're not using any of the texture, but we have the correct color. And that's fine. And then we need to do the same thing for this. Let's see if I can select the right thing. This thing, we'll just move it over to there. Perfect. All right. I still feel like my red is a little bit too red. I mean, these are pretty red. This, yeah, I like this kind of color more, where it's a little bit darker red and desaturated. And then now we just have to figure out, oh, what is this? This is the plastic. Oh no, I made it that same material as well. We ended up not using a plastic material. So this has the same problem. We'll just move these to the gray area somewhere. Shading. So now we just need to play with this glass a bit. It's looking a bit weird. I just don't like how this always gets so dark all the time. Is it because of my... I really got to review... No, that's fine, I guess. Whatever it was at. What's going on here? Because maybe it's just this. Maybe I'm... Let's pick a better one. Yeah, there we go. Because I'm always wondering, like, why is it so dark? It's just reflecting something that's really dark. So I think this could actually be even more rough, because this isn't a very reflective material. It's a pretty, like, dull metal. Okay, now we're making progress. Now it can go a little bit darker, a little bit less contrast. It still has a little bit of reflection, but not too much. Okay, getting there. Materials are always one of those things where you just keep playing with it over and over and over again. All right, so for this glass, I want to do the same thing. Can I still paste those nodes? I can. Nice. Let's plop that into normal. Use FAC instead. Node wrangle on that till we get that. And we want, you know, we basically just want to have like surface imperfections on the glass. The glass should be super not rough. Just a little bit of dirt on there. 0.02. Let's see, can I... Probably even less than that. Yeah, something like that, where, you know, the glass doesn't look perfect, but... Okay, so now we want to play with index of refraction. I never know how to dial this in. I think something like that probably looks okay. What did I use on my other file? I used 1.05. Strangely, it looks completely different. Now, like I said, I like... Well, I don't know if I said that yet, but I don't really like the way that Eevee does glasses, or does glass. So I feel like my final render will probably be in cycles. Because this just, I don't know, the way that Eevee does it does never looks correct to my eye. Yeah, like I can never really figure out why Eevee glass doesn't look right. I mean, it is faking glass, so not super happy with like how Eevee glass ever looks, but I am really happy with what we've done here today. We're at 25 minutes, so probably going to call it pretty soon. But even though we completely just hacked this texture on there, I mean, it looks pretty good. The metal paint has those like little imperfections on the surface. The glass does as well. The top looks really good. The bolt looks nice and shiny. Everything looks pretty close to final. So, let's see. I also want to turn up. Let's see what my Eevee settings are right now. Where is it? Render. I think I want to turn this up a bit. I like a lot of AO. Probably not that much, but... Screen space reflections. I usually never change anything there. For shadows, I usually make this like as big as possible. Soft shadows as well. I don't have lights set up, but I'll do that. I'll do that next time. I guess the next thing we'll do is I'll just put like a wood board down, and we'll just do a quick render in cycles probably, because I prefer cycles. So we'll set up the materials for cycles, do a render, we'll set up the lights, and then I think that's it. That is our gumball machine. So, yeah, see you in hopefully the final part, part 8. Remember to like, comment, subscribe.